This is Ellen, and yes, the screen looks great.
Okay, good. Yeah, sorry. Ahead and pass it to the chair to officially kick off the meeting.
All right, good evening, everyone. I will bring the meeting of June 21st, 2021 of the San Carlos Planning Commission to order. We begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag,
of the
United States of America,
to the Republic,
and
to the republic
for
which it
one
stands,
nation,
one nation, under God, indivisible,
liberty,
and liberty and justice for all.
A roll call, please.
Lisa, you're.
Sorry, yes, I just realized Commissioner Iacopone is absent this evening. I'll start with Commissioner Clements.
Present.
Commissioner Bradley.
Present.
Vice Chair Roof.
Present.
And Chair Garvey.
Present. All right, the next item on our agenda is public comment. Public comment is limited to items not on the agenda. The Commission may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed as allowed by the Brown Act. However, the Commission's general policy is to refer items to staff for attention or have a matter placed on a future Commission agenda for a more comprehensive action or report. Is there anyone in the waiting room who wishes to speak on an item that is not on the agenda? If there is, you can use the raised hand icon at the bottom of your screen, or you can press *9 on your phone. Sarah, anyone in the waiting room?
Not at this time.
All right, moving on. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from our June 7th, 2021 meeting. Does anyone have any changes to the minutes?
None here.
None here.
All right, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Clements.
Aye.
Commissioner Bradley.
Aye.
Vice Chair Roof.
Yes.
And Chair Garvey.
Yes. All right, the next item on our agenda is a public hearing. I'll read the procedure now for a public hearing. Staff will present a report on the history, physical features, etc., on the application, followed with the staff's recommendations. The applicant will make a presentation. Thereafter, interested members of the community may speak on the proposal. When all interested parties have had an opportunity to be heard, the hearing will be closed and no further discussion on the floor can be held. The Commission will then consider the evidence and make its recommendation. If you challenge a public hearing item in court, you may be limited to raising only those issues you or someone else raised at the public hearing described in this notice, the public notice, or in written correspondence delivered to the city at or prior to the public hearing. Speakers will be called upon by the last 3 digits of their phone number and should state their name prior to addressing the Commission. This will assist staff in preparing the minutes. The hearing this evening is 777 Industrial Road, APN 046-100-360 and 046-100-070 and 046-100-080. Request for design review, conditional use permit, variance, transportation demand management plan, and initial study mitigated negative declaration for an addition and renovation of the existing building for a life science research and development use. Lisa, does staff have a presentation on this item?
Yes, Lisa Costa-Sanders will be presenting this evening.
Thank you, Lisa. Good evening, Lisa Costa-Sanders, Principal Planner. We'll go ahead and start off with the next slide. The subject site consists of 2 lots, a flag lot and a smaller lot used for surface parking along Industrial Road. The combined site area is approximately 2.88 acres in area. The site is currently developed with a 68,683 square feet auto sale and repair facility for the Honda dealership. The site is located within the heavy industrial zoning district and planned industrial general plan land use designation. The site is bordered by Industrial Road and Highway 101 and surrounded by commercial buildings. This graphic was prepared for the East Side Vision Study area and shows the study area boundaries as well as proposed developments within the boundaries. The City Council initiated the East Side Vision Study to guide development in this area, including community benefits, street standards and transportation connectivity, and land use form. The study is currently underway and scheduled to be complete in September. The City Council requested that all projects within the study area that include a request for a planned development zoning designation be considered after the completion of the study. The project before you is not subject to that stipulation as it complies with the underlying zoning with the approval of the requested entitlements before you. I also wanted to orient the Commission to the proximity of the recently approved and proposed developments to this project. So as you see that orange project shown number 2, 7787 Industrial Road, thank you, Lisa, is right immediately adjacent to a proposed development at 888 Branston and closely completed life science development at 887 Industrial Road known as Meridian 25. All of the approved and proposed developments on this map, with the exception of a proposed hotel at 501 Industrial, are all life science uses. Next slide. The site was formerly utilized by Liquid Carbonics starting in the late 1950s, and that was acquired and operated by Praxair from approximately 1996 to 2003 for the manufacturing, repackaging, and distribution of industrial gases. As I indicated, the site is currently developed with an auto sales and repair facility with at-grade cover parking utilized by the Honda dealership. The applicant, Presidio Bay Ventures, acquired the property and proposes to redevelopment for life science use. Next slide. The applicant proposes to renovate and add on to the existing building to develop a 4-story, 150,775 square foot life science building with at-grade parking and landscaping improvements. The requested entitlements include a variance, conditional use permit, design review, and transportation demand management plan. And now I'll walk through the Commission with each of those entitlements. The request for a variance is from the floor area standards and specifically to exclude the covered parking area, about 28,320 square feet, from the floor area calculations. The existing building was constructed to provide ongoing access to the monitoring wells as part of the remediation efforts for, as well as observation of the groundwater contamination at the site. The cleanup is being conducted by Praxair, which is considered the responsible party for the contamination under the authority of the San Mateo County Environmental Health Department. And as you see from this graphic highlighted in yellow, the site includes many monitoring wells that are maintained by Praxair. And as you can see from the location of the wells, they really cover a large portion of the property and really limits the development opportunities. So with the Honda dealership, they were quite creative and found a way to build above those monitoring wells, but still allow continued access to them by placing at-grade parking beneath the building. On the next slide, you see that staff finds that the required findings to grant a variance can be met at this site. The presence of the active groundwater monitoring wells is exceptional and extraordinary. The monitoring wells present a physical hardship that limits the development opportunity at the site. The granting of the variance will not be detrimental as evaluated in the mitigated negative declaration, and the project is consistent with the general plan as well as zoning. The conditional use permit is requested to allow 2 stair towers. Both comply with the 16-foot height projection, but not the corresponding setback from wall face without the issuance of a conditional use permit. The code requires that for each foot you're above the 50-foot height limit for a tower, you're required to step that element in 1 foot from the face of the wall. And in this case, as you see, it either projects away from or is flat with the face of the building wall. So the code does allow the provision for a conditional use permit to be issued by the Planning Commission. The stair towers are centrally located on the building with large setbacks from adjacent properties. The stair towers add to the architectural interest of the building, and staff is supportive of the conditional use permit request. Next, for design review, this facade is the northern facing elevation, which is the main entrance to the building. The renovated building would maintain much of the existing footprint, but seeks to create a more uniform and larger dimension compared to the existing building, and would include changes in wall planes and building heights. The design shifts the building from a predominantly concrete facade to one of glazed glass with variation in materials and patterns, as well as offset floors to accentuate sections. The proposed exterior building materials include brushed aluminum slab covers, spandrel or opaque bird-safe glass, exterior glazing, and cement plaster. The facade for this stair tower would be perforated metal with backlighting to provide greater contrast with the building face. The next view is a rendering of the building, shows the north and west facing elevations. The building is 3 stories of life science use above covered parking area and does comply with the 50-foot height limit. You can also see the rooftop landscaped amenity feature that would be available for building occupants. The next view is of the building along Highway 101. Here you can see the south and east facing elevations, as well as that tucked under covered parking area. Staff is supportive of the architectural design of the building. The applicant has also submitted a transportation demand management plan with measures to achieve 20% trip reduction. That includes bicycle parking, repair station showers, changing facility, as well as a commuter program with marketing and outreach to encourage transportation alternatives. This TDM plan has been reviewed by the City and County Associations of Government, and they found it to meet the requirements of the county's congestion management program. As well, the city's transportation consultant also reviewed the plan and found it to comply with the city's requirements. On the next slide, I've shown you the distance the site is from Caltrain. So it's approximately a half mile to the Caltrain station, which is about a 12-minute walk. And then finally, a mitigated negative declaration has been prepared in accordance with the California Environmental Quality Act guidelines. That analysis found that the proposed project would not result in any significant impacts to the environment with the implementation of mitigation measures. The project is subject to mitigation measures included in the MND as well as attached to the resolution in your packet. These mitigation measures are standard for this type of development and include construction best management practices, nesting bird survey, measures if cultural resources are discovered, requirement to implement the recommendations of the geotechnical report, as well as implementation measures for the TDM plan. Next slide. The negative declaration was available for public review and comment from May 14th through June 2nd. And we did receive 1 public comment expressing concern with construction-related impacts to the adjacent business. The commenter did not raise any CEQA-related issues that have not already been addressed in the document. Staff has added conditions to the approval certificate to address the comments raised by the member of the public, which is the long-term leaseholder of the building in front of this site. And that requires the developer to attend a pre-construction meeting with building and planning staff prior to the start of any construction on site, as well as coordinate with the adjacent business owner for any work or deliveries that may impact their use of the easement area. And finally, with neighborhood outreach and public notice, the applicant mailed information on the project to property owners and occupants within 300 feet of the site. They held meetings with the Greater East Side community members, as well as spoke with representatives of Medallic Dance Studio. I'm pronouncing that wrong. The public notice of this meeting was mailed to all property owners and occupants within 300 feet of the site on June 8th and published in the newspaper on June 10th. Staff has not received any additional comments on the project as of this evening. And finally, we have the motion, should you be prepared to make that this evening. I also have our CEQA consultant, Rebecca Auld of Lathir Gregory here this evening if you have any CEQA related questions. And the applicant would like to give a brief presentation as well. And that concludes staff presentation. You can either answer any questions or you can turn it over to the applicant. Thank you.
All right, Lisa, thank you very much. That was a very good presentation, very thorough. Do any commissioners have any clarifying questions of Lisa before we ask the applicant to make their presentation?
And at this time,
I have a quick question of Lisa.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Lisa, thanks for the presentation, and I appreciate the clarity of the findings and the conformity to make. Can you clarify the landscape plan includes 5 trees plus 42 around the perimeter, and that 41 are required based on the proposed number of parking spaces? So that is based on the city's standard. And so what is the city's standard? And, you know, I ask because the rendering seems devoid of trees, and we know how important trees are for our health. So, and yet it seems like it is meeting the city's requirement. So what is the city's requirement and how is that derived?
Sure. So I'm sorry, I don't have that city requirement off the tip of my fingers. Maybe Lisa Forrest can help me with that, or I'll look it up in just a moment. But we do want to see some shade trees within the parking area to provide some relief. So there is a ratio in the code of how many trees that are required in the open parking areas. There were some challenges though with the site and the placement of the trees when we reviewed it with the fire marshal. So the fire department wants to have I believe it's a 26-foot wide fire road all the way around the building so that they have the ability to access the building, as well as a 75-degree climbing angle for their ladder trucks, a distance of 15 to 30 feet away from the building. Then they want to make sure that there's no trees conflicting with the ability for the fire engine to be able to go around the site, as well as the engine ability to access the rooftop with the ladder. So that does limit our ability to put a lot of landscaping closer to the building, and it forced it to go out a bit into the parking lot and even around the perimeter of the site. So I think that's what you noticed on the site plan, is those trees are pushed away to make sure that there's some clear fire access. And then I'll be able to get back to the other part of your question later.
And through the chair, I can answer Commissioner Clemens' question about the tree standard. So this is found in section 18.18.070 of the San Carlos Municipal Code under trees. And the requirement for projects in the industrial district is that there needs to be 1 tree for every 5,000 square feet of lot coverage. So that's how the standard is written.
Okay. Thanks. I had another question, which is the amount of paving around the property. Was there any effort to do permeable paving? And then just third, the route of walking to Caltrain 12 minutes is great, very walkable. And just wondered what that walk path looked like and how tree lined or shady that is, and, you know, kind of how easy that is to walk as well.
Sure. So the applicant can clarify afterwards, but essentially they're taking over that site that was already developed by the Honda dealership and not replacing any of the paving, except where they're reconfiguring the parking a bit and some of the tree wells are shifting a bit. I don't know the ability to have permeable paving with the site contaminations. That's an interesting question. And as well, the fire department does have a lot of concerns about permeable paving to making sure it meets their load-bearing access requirements. So there could be opportunities in other portions of the site, just not where the fire access would be. And then, Lisa, for us, if you want to go back to the map that was after the TDM plan I had, just from Google, I just looked at what kind of that fastest route might be, and somebody could certainly cut across. But at the moment, it looks like it's coming up one of the residential streets. And so, yes, that would be with a sidewalk and tree lined, would be kind of the most direct route. Industrial Road does have sidewalks, but at the moment, maybe not very tree lined. I think we're looking with the East Side Plan recommendations to improve that walkability.
Thank you very much. That's all the questions I have, Chair. Thank you.
Any other questions? I just had one comment, and Commissioner Clements got to the issue of trees. 41 trees were required and 42 trees are being proposed. I was hoping for more trees, and Lisa, it sounds like the fire department has some regulations, and that necessitated because when I looked at the one rendering that showed some trees, they looked really spaced apart, and I thought, oh, we could fit in more trees, and it sounds like we actually can't fit in more trees because of these fire codes. Can you clarify that?
Well, it's really around the fire access route. So it just takes you around the perimeter of the building. And then also, it's going to be that flag access driveway. And then between that access road and the building, it's difficult to have any large trees because they're going to grow and they're going to block the fire access. But in the parking area and around the perimeter, there would be an opportunity. And we can have the applicant maybe discuss if there's an opportunity to add additional trees to the landscape plan.
All right, thank you. Any other questions before we ask the applicant to come forward? All right, the applicant, please come forward and with your team, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Cyrus Sanandaji. Thank you so much for having us here. And I'd like to start off by thanking staff, particularly Ms. Sanders and our consultant, Ms. Alb, as well, for just being fantastically cooperative and really helpful in this entire planning process. We're grateful to be here today. We prepared a very short presentation, being cognizant of your time, and I'll plan to touch on some of the questions or highlight some of the responses to your questions as we go through this. So, Lisa, if you don't mind, I'll try to get through these slides as quickly as possible here. We're a area-based development firm and have been here for and in operation for a little over 10 years. This is our first project in San Carlos, but we are very excited to continue to expand our roots in San Carlos, and particularly continue with future projects. It's, as I said, it's been a great experience so far in working with the city through this process to date. And we look forward to being able to hopefully secure your approval for the project and move forward with construction. I apologize. I don't believe I'm controlling the screen here.
Yeah, you can just tell me next slide and I'd
Oh,
down.
sure. We can skip to slide 3 if you don't mind.
Okay. So that's good.
So that's perfect. Thank you. From the onset, we'd set out project objectives primarily with a focus on achieving a win-win with the city and to demonstrate our long-term commitment to the community. We pursued an adaptive reuse project as opposed to new construction, with the focus on minimizing environmental impact and really maximizing what had just been built there and delivered not more than 3 years prior to us acquiring the property. We understood the priorities that the city and planning staff have for the area in terms of setting high quality design and furthering the overall East Side Innovation District. And of course, part of our goal with the adaptive reuse of the building was to ensure that after the Honda dealership left and the family of the business, the owners of the business who actually developed the building are in the process of selling their franchise or dealership, which would then relocate the business, that we wouldn't end up with a vacant property or building at the property. Lisa, if we could go to the next slide. We've touched on the fact that this is within the existing and burgeoning life science cluster. If we can go to the next slide. As it relates specifically to our project, we covered sort of the odd panhandle shape configuration of the site itself. I would add that we have, and touching on the comment about trees, we have sought to maximize the placement of trees within the constraints that were provided to us by fire. This is our latest landscaping plan, and we, to the extent possible, have continued what exists in terms of trees along industrial in front of the Melodic Remedy or studio, and have tried to maximize to take advantage of the parking lot that's immediately on industrial that wouldn't have fire restrictions. So you can see on the bottom right of the screen there that's really where we've concentrated a lot of the landscaping in terms of larger format trees. We do still have trees along the building itself, but given the constraints within the fire lane, have had to maintain certain species that are shorter in height and narrower in canopy. And in fact, those larger format trees that you see providing shade through the parking area, the surface parking area, were actually twofold. So they were actually further and covering the drive aisle sort of plan east. And that's what we had to keep clear to provide this unobstructed fire lane, fire access. So the intention originally was to actually have that be a double canopy, if you will, along those islands. And unfortunately, we weren't able to accomplish that. So we've maximized sort of the site landscaping. And though we're limited in terms of the number of large format trees with tall canopies, wide canopies, it will be a lush site that we hope will accomplish the goals that the commissioners had raised in your questions around landscaping and trying to mitigate some of that heat island effect and so on. If we can go to the next slide, please. By point of comparison, we actually have 47 trees compared to the 24, though our footprint is essentially the same as the existing building. We're squaring off the existing footprint and adding a full floor to the project within the height limit, with the exceptions that Ms. Sanders had highlighted. But we're close to doubling the number of trees. Again, we'd hoped to be able to provide more, but ran into those limitations there. We're also providing extensive bike parking facilities, locker rooms and showers, again, all part of our TDM measures, 20 carpool and van pool spaces, EV charging, and also the motorcycle parking spots, all of which we hope will help enhance the optionality of commuting and transit to and from the building. And in fact, as a building, we're also going to be providing e-bikes as a building amenity so that our tenants during lunchtime and so on can actually take those, even if they don't have a bike or don't have bikes at their workplace, can just grab a bike and ride downtown, again, to try to help mitigate and minimize the congestion. In fact, the city's traffic engineers, our transportation study demonstrated that with all of that, the proposed building, despite its size increase, actually decreases peak hours and won't change prior to the dealership that's in place, which is a rather heavy and impactful use. If we can go to the next page, please. We, as a firm, are really committed to ensuring that we're a long-term member of the community and look to ensure that as part of any planning process, we're listening to and trying to address as much of the concerns that may be directly related to our project, but also may have broader implications to the neighborhood, unrelated to our project, at least directly. This is just some of the broader categories of items of discussion that we'd had with various neighbors and members of the community, and some of our responses as well. There was some question and concern around light pollution, particularly given the proximity to the residential housing. We have, in accordance obviously with the LEED standards and Cal Green and so on, we'll have light sensors and motion sensors all the way throughout. There won't be any light pollution in that any of the site lighting is going to be concentrated and directed strictly to the minimum levels of foot candles required for code compliance, and focused on the pedestrian areas of circulation on the site. In terms of landscaping and the pedestrian views, there's a slide here that is just a before and proposed that will highlight that we really sought to enhance the surface parking lot on industrial, which is really the only frontage on industrial that we control, to significantly sort of landscape and essentially obscure the view of our building. There was a request that left turns on industrial, it could pose potential risks in terms of pedestrian safety. We committed to increasing and ensuring that there's plentiful signage on our property at the and exits to warn against sort of making sure that people don't cross those medians and are aware of pedestrian traffic. We fielded a question regarding freeway noise, which I'm sure comes up with every project. And certainly the request was that we increase our landscaping, and that's how we came up with the additional sort of 48. We tried to make sure that the species that we specified, that our landscape architects specified, were eventually at full maturity, were rather dense trees that could help in whatever way that trees can help muffle or mitigate noise. There's, I'm sure, as the commission has heard, concerns in the neighborhood about cut-through traffic and shuttles, particularly from these projects on industrial. We won't be providing a shuttle at our project. Our project is of a size that we don't believe that tenants will themselves operate these either, but nonetheless, we are not operating one as a matter of practice for the building, which we do understand some of the other projects will be. We've instead heavily focused on our mass transit options and how to provide more connectivity for our site, and the e-bikes is one example of that. In terms of the construction impact itself, it was touched upon that we've had correspondence and met with the owner of the dance studio on site. There had been concern and candidly impact during the course of construction initially of the Primo Honda dealership prior to our ownership. And we understood that that had a significant impact on the safety of the children who were being dropped off and picked up at the school, and we're very sensitive to that. We have, in fact, developed a pretty extensive site logistics plan for construction that we shared with the owner of the dance studio and had committed to ongoing coordination, as Ms. Sanders had touched on, during the course of construction, in fact, appointing a project manager from both the general contracting firm and from our company, who will be coordinating with the dance studio on a regular basis and making sure that they're apprised of any of the activity. Further, that, and again, we're unsure of the circumstance around this, but our site and the 767 site, which is the property in which the dance studio is located, depend on reciprocal easements for ingress and egress. And so there's no intention on impacting or shutting down either of those because both sites, again, are dependent on those. And we understand that there may have been some closure during the construction of the Primo Honda sites. That was really the extent of the concern and the communication. We had also had discussion around the existing remediation efforts that Praxair is responsible for, and provided an update with respect to the status of the same. That is ongoing, and from Afton, which is the consultant that's overseeing the remediation, from their reports, it is progressing very positively, and the remediation is working, which is great news. If we can go to the next slide, please. This was just a highlight of the site logistics plan for construction, which shows that we would be staging and handling all of our materials and storage and so on within our property and away from the easements and the access. If we can go to the next slide, please. And these are some views of the current building, just for context. And some folks may not have had the ability to drive around the site. So Lisa, if you don't mind, we can just go through these. It just shows some views generally showing angles. We can keep going. This is the site, pointing, looking northbound. This is now southbound. And this is the current view. I think it's worth noting this. And if we can go to the next slide, that's sort of the enhanced landscaping that we're proposing. Again, just to obscure the building. I would note that the building on the right in the rendering was our assumption or estimation of what the 888 Branston project would look like. It may not be 100% accurate. We just wanted to show that really the view of our project is obscured from Industrial Road. And just some highlights in terms of our ongoing commitment to the community. We are members of the chamber. Presidio Bay, just as a firm, has a longstanding commitment to education efforts. We have an ongoing real estate scholarship program that we're actually running every summer. This is the inaugural year of us doing it formally, but we plan to continue to do that. We are also building out extensive sort of childcare in several of our facilities and projects. And then similarly as well are actually not just commercial developers, but do quite a lot of housing and multifamily development, and have been speaking with Al and Lisa about opportunities and how we can explore housing production and residential development in San Carlos as well. Just knowing that on the one hand, while we build commercial, it's also important to provide housing for those that are seeking jobs there and help to address our housing shortage at the moment, which is affecting really every jurisdiction statewide. So with that, I just wanted to thank the commission for your time. And Lisa, I think we can go to the next slide and hold it there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sanandaji. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
You did. Thank you so much for your time. And we're available for any questions. My colleague Sandra is here as well, who's the architect who can speak to any of the more technical questions.
Well, thank you. One comment before I ask my fellow commissioners if they have any questions of you or your architect before we hear from the public. I was pleased to be refreshed with the rendering with all the trees that you'll be planting out on the side, out on the front by Industrial, by that parking area. I drove down Industrial today past the new Meridian complex that is just finishing up. And of course, they are fully landscaped. And for the first time, I saw 2 people jogging on that new sidewalk right by the building and 1 person walking a dog. So it was just really pleasant to see that. And if they were to continue on down the street, they would run past the new trees that you'll be planting in that new parking lot. So I was really pleased to see that rendering. Thank you. Do any of my colleagues have any questions of the applicant or the architect before we hear from the public?
I have a few. Oh,
Go ahead.
Yes, Commissioner Roof, and then we'll go to Commissioner Bradley.
I have a number of them, so I'll ask a couple of them, and then I'll let the others ask, and then I may have some at the end as well. But I appreciate the very clear presentation, and it looks like a beautiful building, and the trees look like an improvement over what's there now. So that's all really good looking. I wanted to get a few more thoughts from you about your long-term commitment to the community that you mentioned, how that would actually come about, in that there's big plans for the East Side District, some of which involve green corridors and things that I guess this building kind of falls under the threshold for needing to be part of the development plan. But in what ways do you see this development contributing a little bit more broadly outside the building itself to the community?
Commissioner Roof, I apologize. My computer, of course, crashed as soon as you asked your question.
Oh, okay.
Do you mind just repeating? I just logged back in and I heard
Okay.
the end of the question, which said community.
Yes. Well, first, I congratulate you on a very nice looking building and like the trees.
Thank you so much.
But then I wanted to hear a little bit more from you about the long-term commitment to community that you mentioned in terms of how that would actually be manifest, because this building doesn't seem to be part of a larger development project in the East Side where there'll be green corridors or other infrastructure in the larger area. So what do you mean by long-term commitment to community?
I'm speaking about Presidio Bay as a firm and generally our commitment. So we have been involved in all of the jurisdictions that we've started projects in. We don't just do one project, and in fact, we're speaking actively at the moment. They're in contract to acquire a larger site in San Carlos, and are speaking with planning staff at the moment, talking about that project. As part of that and our commitment to San Carlos and doing multiple projects there, we are in active discussions with the Parks and Rec Foundation and the Education Foundation, the Chamber, and other community groups, and trying to get involved with initiatives that more directly benefit the community in San Carlos, and specifically looking not just to monetary, but specifically sort of our involvement and active participation in these various groups and areas. And so that's really what I mean by our commitment to San Carlos.
Okay. I noticed that you mentioned the affordable housing support and a figure there of $2 million. Is that part of a formal agreement? Are you obligated to follow through on that, or is that a conceptual?
Sanders can speak to that on the technical side, but that's part of the impact fees that would be levied against the project. So it's not an optional contribution. It's part of the permitting and approval process.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for making that clear. I mean, you rightfully should get credit for that's a good chunk of money, but wanted to make sure it was formalized. The remediation, I was happy to hear that it sounds like it's working, but what would happen if it wasn't working? I mean, it's nice that they're doing testing, but I'm just curious how the remediation and the pollution there could potentially impact the community. I mean, is it possible trouble could ensue?
Well, so a couple of things. And Lisa, do you mind pulling up maybe the last slide of I prepared just a single page on the current status of the remediation that came from Aptim, which is the consultant. But as a matter of, I think, just understanding, Praxair, which had formerly occupied the site, is the responsible party from a chain of title standpoint, and not speaking from a legal perspective, but legally speaking, the county holds them accountable, the state holds them accountable. They have an obligation to satisfy remediation and to remove any elevated levels of toxins that otherwise would prove or pose a danger to the community. And so the approach that they've taken is ISAB is what they call it, this in situ anaerobic bioremediation, which is sort of injecting enzymes into these wells and into the ground in order to then resolve any of the pollutants that are in the groundwater. So just in terms of, as we understand it again, and we're not involved in the remediation, to be clear, Praxair continues to be the responsible party. Aptim is their third party. They're following a procedure that's approved by the county health officials. But if the ISAB wouldn't show positive results, they would be forced to pursue alternative means to remediation. But they are obligated to remediate the groundwater contamination that they've caused, essentially. That's really the short answer there.
Okay, thank you. I'll be quiet now in case another commissioner has a question for you, and then I have one or two little ones at the end.
No problem. And Commissioner Roof, I would just add, just in terms of remediation and the rate at which the remediation is occurring and what they're observing, it's interesting to note that they actually anticipate that their bioremediation will likely be completed. At least they go back for their next monitoring September of 2021. So they feel pretty optimistic that it has shown extremely positive results and they could be done in relatively short order.
Oh, that's interesting. But you'll proceed with a plan that enables the monitoring wells indefinitely?
We have no choice but to, because there is no proof that necessarily that could just be them being overly optimistic, I would say. We have no choice, and we cannot get in the way of the monitoring wells or their ability to, because it could be that the sampling they took was positive and so on, or and so on. So we have to maintain total access and flexibility for them.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Roof. We will not forget and loop back with you after we've heard from everyone once. Commissioner Bradley, you had a few questions?
Yes, just one now, but I'd like first to give a favorable comment to the architects and designers of your project. You've taken a rather massive, unattractive building, frankly, concrete slab structure, and provided us with a facade of light and clean materials, and I congratulate you on that. Being able to do that, pull it off, is not easy. My question is, do you have any idea of how many jobs you will be creating approximately?
We do, and thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. The team has worked extremely tirelessly, and it's been a fantastic team again in collaboration with the city, with Al and Lisa and their entire team. So thank you for that comment. We anticipate that the job creation would be somewhere in the 500 to 600 job range, just given the anticipated use for life science type tenants.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Clements, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I also wanted to express some delight that a building such as this, that's so prominently visible in the community, can be reused, not just reused, but repurposed and made much more attractive. And I will not have to look at some empty car dealership for the next 10 plus years and wish that it were being torn down. So I'm very, very happy that this can be made into an attractive property. Just a couple of questions. I'm wondering if could we go back to the renderings and see again what the view that we would have from the main kind of pedestrian connections. I wanted to see how the building faces the street, and I was having a hard time finding that again in the packet.
I think the best view would be the industrial, the rendering, Lisa, that we had in our presentation was probably the one with the trees.
Oh, the one with the 3 trees and the higher building to the right.
That's really
Yes.
the pedestrian, vehicular,
Got
and
it.
bicycle sort of perspective or view of the project, just given, if you recall from one of the earlier slides, the panhandle shape of the site. It's really essentially straddling the freeway.
Right, and so it's set back and not directly visible. And then the entrance is then which side of the building? Is it this close side of the building?
That's our property and entrance where the monument sign is.
Got it.
Which is
Thus
currently
they shared the easement.
Yeah.
Got it.
Well, no, and the shared easement is actually on the northern side. So
okay.
It's on the northern side of the Melodic Remedy building. Lisa, do you mind going one slide back? Perfect. So the current Honda monument sign, that location would stay, but that marks the entrance to the
I see.
to the property. And then if Lisa, if you don't mind going to maybe slide 4. I was just going to pull up the landscape plan to point out, or that, sure. That one.
Oh, yeah.
Too.
Yeah,
you can see where the arrows are. So that's our property there.
I see it.
And then the easement is actually on the northern side, that gray. Yeah. And so so in essence,
I see.
the tenants of Melodic Remedy and ours would use what Lisa just highlighted.
Okay, and the dance studio is right to the left of the red dotted line. Is this one?
It's that building, exactly.
Okay.
That's right.
Thank you for clarifying that. Good. You know, one of the challenges I think in industrial buildings is trying to balance the needs of the buildings, which often have surface parking and kind of like, you know, a center building with parking around. It's kind of a large structure with something that hopefully is a little bit more fine grained that people want to walk near and want to be close to. And you certainly hit the mark on the attractiveness. And it's too bad it's really hidden from the street. And that, you know, it's more of a highway view, which is all good. But at some point, perhaps those front parcels will also be redeveloped, but hopefully we'll get more of a view of your pretty building when that happens. I wanted to also commend your use of parking stackers and making the most of the space that you have. And I'm excited to see the TDM program resulting in decrease of parking spaces and you know, providing additional ways to get to Caltrain and trying to use the assets that we've got, even though you've situated so well close to the highway. So that's great news, I think. When you mentioned that you did include childcare spaces in some of your buildings, I was wondering whether that was a consideration for this building and whether you considered that and whether that did not work out.
Candidly, not for this building, but for the new project that we're exploring, that is certainly an amenity that we're exploring, and partly because we are limiting any occupancy on the ground, on the surface level, on grade, due to the wells and the remediation. We, just given the fact that there is active remediation at the site, we don't want to encourage necessarily that type of use. And so our other project that we're working on, that we've just started, is more appropriately sort of positioned for that.
Thanks. 2 more comments, then I'll hand it back off to my other commissioners. One, you named different organizations in the community that you were talking to. I wanted to suggest that, you know, the ability to use office space or meeting space for the community, I think is going to be in high demand for some of our nonprofits as they go through a difficult period with giving and have had to consolidate operations. And in full disclosure, I'm on the Community Foundation Board of San Carlos, and also another avenue for you to talk about these kinds of issues with. But I know that that has been brought up on other projects as, the access for the community to some meeting spaces and some, ability for nonprofits to potentially share or access cubes and office spaces. So just wanted to run that by you and see if you're open to that. Not that I don't think the city can require that. There's no development agreement involved. I just wanted to raise the possibility.
I think we would certainly be open, as an example, the roof deck area would be a great event space. So for example, hosting fundraisers, for an evening cocktail hour or things like that. Now that we're sort of back in a post-pandemic setting, we're certainly open to doing things like that. And that's exactly the type of thing that we're, when we say we're actively committed to expanding our roots in a community, those are the types of things that we like doing.
That's a great idea. That's a nice roof deck, potentially. And then one more question, which is, I saw one of the reports saying that no tenant had been identified yet. And your estimate of jobs, 500 to 600, wanted to just confirm that that's true, that no tenant has still been identified.
That's correct.
Okay. And then, just in terms of housing needs generated, I guess the commercial linkage fee takes care of the affordable housing obligation. But one of the things I'm always interested in is what are the pay levels of the jobs created? And then, what's the housing need generated by the jobs created if they're not new? And so, yeah. But if it's life sciences or R&D, probably higher income, or at least moderate for most of them.
That's right. And generally, I think what we found in the Bay Area, at least just given the cost of living and so on, is that the jobs are commensurate with sort of the ability of the employees to then afford to live within a acceptable sort of driving distance from these sites. And so really we're seeing this from Burlingame, South City, down San Carlos, down to Palo Alto even, that a lot of the researchers, the scientists, they're local, and we're not seeing a lot of commuting across the Bay, for example. We can just go off of what we know to be the tenant profiles and generally what these types of life science companies do as a matter of practice, but obviously couldn't speak to the specifics there. So,
Right. And then, if I may, Chair, may I ask staff one clarifying question?
Yes.
Thank you. Lisa. Just wanted to understand better with an adaptive reuse like this, when you think about trip generation, how is it the net new space that we're assessing and the TDM programs applied to, with the parking demand, or is it the entire property that is assessed, a certain number of trips, and thinking about it that way because it is a change in use? How does that work here?
Correct. So the transportation demand management plan is to address the 20% reduction on the trips generated by this use, not just the net new trips. Some fees, like the transportation impact fee, is based on net new trips. But what you said is correct. The TDM plan addresses the total project trips for this use, and it is a change in land use as well as an addition to a building.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Sanandaji, one comment and three questions. The comment is, I will echo my colleague's comment that it comments that the building is extremely attractive. The design is really outstanding, and I really commend you on the glazed glass. I think I'll echo a couple of people's comments, is going to be so much better than the concrete. And more sort of granular, I appreciate that you're able to reuse all of the good utility work that was done not so long ago when the Honda dealership was built, as well as I think it's the first floor slab you're keeping and the second floor slab you're keeping. So a lot less noise, a lot less disruption, a lot less dust by being able to reuse those two slabs. My first question relates to the solar panels. There's solar panels on the Honda dealership now, but you're going to be removing the roof, adding another floor, and then what happens? You're going to re-add the solar panels back onto that roof. Can you tell me how that works?
Absolutely, and thank you so much for your comments as well regarding the design. Our goal is to decommission the building in its entirety, and specifically as it relates to the solar panels, to avoid demolition at all costs. And so from the solar panels, the PV panels, the ERCS system, for example, the EV chargers that are there, to the extent that any and all of that equipment can be decommissioned, removed from the building, stored safely on site, we plan to then reinstall all of them. So, and in fact, in our renderings, Lisa, perhaps you can show maybe one or two. There's a couple more bird's eye type views there. We pointed out, or we've rendered all the space that's not otherwise occupiable, deck space or mechanical space. That was actually a great one. Thank you. You can see sort of the central area is mechanical equipment, and we centralized it to adhere to the 1-for-1 sort of ratio, the setback ratio that Ms. Sanders had touched on. But everywhere else other than the occupiable roof deck is going to have those solar panels reinstalled. And while we have, or because we have more roof area, we can actually accommodate the solar panels that are all there despite these additions.
That's good to hear. So you'll be able to accommodate the roof recreational area with still the same quota of solar panels that were there and that you still need.
And the additional mechanical infrastructure as well.
All right. Yeah. That's very helpful and good to hear. Thank you. My second question, I wanted to learn a little bit more about these stackers. This is the first project I've been on, I think, where there's been stackers used in a commercial situation like this. In reading through the packet, it said that the stackers would be somewhere between 3 and 5 levels, TBD for the future. I'm wondering if you've decided a little more firmly how many levels it is. And I couldn't quite figure out how many levels were going to be below grade. Can you help me just understand a little bit more about these stackers?
I absolutely. And they say a picture paints 1,000 words, and I'm remiss for not including a picture, but I will try to describe what the shuffler or puzzler system looks like. There's no below grade excavation, so it's actually on grade. And picture driving into your garage at home. It has a roll-up gate or garage door. You drive in, and rather when you drive into this, and there's really only 2 or 3 dedicated spots that you would drive into, and everyone drives into the same ones. And almost like a game of Tetris, what you're driving up onto is a platform that is sitting on small wheels, and that's tied to a system that has pulleys and essentially rails and tracks. And so you would pull in, you would park your car, and you would leave. And that is your dedicated stall that you will always park in, meaning that's the same gate you always drive in and out of. It's the same platform your car is always going to be on, and they're dedicated. The puzzler system, that the actual parking stacker, will then slide your car into the back or up the stack. And I believe we're actually doing they're 3-car stacks, so they're 3 in height. But there's gaps, again, at the floor to allow for this puzzler to move the cars forward and back in a tandem scenario, and then sideways and up and down. But in essence, if you think of it, and I really wish that I had a photograph here, it's essentially a 3-level robot that you drive in and out of the same spot. So if you were to leave work, you would hit the clicker, and within a matter of a minute or a minute and a half, no matter where your car is within the stacker, it will deliver your car to you at grade, and then the gate would pull up, and you would walk in and get into your car and then pull out, just as you would in your home.
That's very helpful. Yeah, the commission has reviewed these in the past with multi-unit residential development, and we're generally familiar with it, but I appreciate your extra detail. One of the things that we had in a couple of the residential developments was, and some of the more recent ones, was the ability to put an EV charger in the stacker, which at first I didn't understand how it worked, but many people have explained this, and I'm curious if you are anticipating doing something similar.
We are, and in fact, these units are self-contained, so structurally they have their own power and their own sprinkler systems, their own fire suppression. And each of those platforms that I described are EV ready. And so you can put your dedicated charger, again, because your vehicle stays on your platform, and we can put the charger there, and you can connect your vehicle to the charger. And your vehicle stays with the platform and the charger no matter where in the shuffler it gets moved to, or where the puzzler gets moved to.
Very helpful. Thank you for that explanation. And my last question relates to parking. Based on the square footage, 229 parking spaces are required. And with the transportation demand management plan that requires a 20% reduction, that brings us down to 183 spaces that are required. Your project is proposing 198 spaces. I'm curious, why so many? With all of your focus on mass transit and us being only a half a mile, you being only a half a mile from the train station, I'm hopeful that there's a lot of people taking transit, and I'm hoping that you don't need all the parking spaces, but I'm curious as to why you put in so many more than you needed to.
Candidly, we're hopeful of the same, and we truly do believe that long term, we're going to be in a situation where we're moving away from vehicles. We do think that nonetheless, particularly within the context of where we are today and what the pandemic highlighted, that as much as we want mass transit and public transit to be utilized, it's certainly not something that ridership, for example, is just not where it was a year and a half ago, as an example. So part of the reason we pursued the stackers is that it's modular and we're able to remove them long term. We're not wasting a lot of space in that sense. We needed to mitigate just knowing where the market is currently, so that it's just a viability and leasability issue. But we're hopeful that we won't actually need those spaces. And that's part of the flexibility of the eventually long term of being able to decommission and relocate the stackers elsewhere, for example, to a different project.
Thank you. Very helpful response. Commissioner Roof, I'm going to loop back to you, and then I'll check in with my other colleagues and see if there's a second round of questions from anyone else.
Okay, great. My question actually follows nicely from that one on the parking. The TDM plan, I was pleased to see that you used conservative estimates for the number of employees per square foot for office space and for lab space. So hopefully the TDM plan in terms of the amount of trips required by the building. But as you were alluding, there's some uncertainty about that. So I saw that there's a 5-year review of the TDM plan. Is that 5 years something that's mandated by by the law or the code, or is that something that's built into this proposal? I don't know if that's a question for the applicant or for the city staff. I'm curious.
Yeah, I would be happy to answer that. We've placed it in two areas for this project. So the city's municipal code does require the monitoring, and specifically after the 5 years. As well, we've included it with the mitigation monitoring plan that's a part of the CEQA document, because we are relying on implementation of the TDM plan to comply with the new CEQA requirements for vehicle miles traveled. So we need to show that we're reducing the trips and complying with vehicle miles traveled. So we've also included as a mitigation measure to make sure that there's ongoing monitoring, and that if they're not meeting that trip reduction, then they're going to have to come up with another plan, another implementing measure in order to do so. So we've got it in 2 places.
So that would be a 5-year, it's sort of like a 5-year run, and then there's an opportunity to fix it if needed.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah, 5 years seems pretty long, but I guess, but at least there is an option to fix it. Is there a drop off for the applicant, a drop off zone, or for car services, or for or if the shuttle were to come along there, where would that sort of activity be conducted?
Commissioner, if you see there's an ADA path by the sort of middle large tree in the middle of the parking lot going to...
Oh, the crosshatched?
That's the crosshatch there, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That area is essentially a passenger loading and unloading zone. And so the idea would be that we would, through cooperation with the rideshare services and so on, designate that as the passenger pickup and drop off area right at the front door of the building.
I see. Okay. Yes, so it's sort of a way to multi-purpose that space with the fire department needs, and also have it be a drop-off zone. Okay, good. I'm glad to see that that's there. I was happy to hear that you're providing the e-bikes, because one thing with all these big buildings going up, it's nice if employees have an opportunity to zip over into town to go shopping or go to a restaurant during lunch. So the e-bike plan sounded really good. Was that part of the TDM? I mean, is that a mandated thing, or is that a nice to have?
No, I don't believe so, but that's just something that we've always provided bicycles as part of our developments. And now that e-bikes have become a little bit more prevalent, given the distances we're talking about, it makes riding a bike a lot more accessible to folks, even if you've got, joint pain or otherwise. It's not necessarily a strenuous activity to drive down and go to Laurel Street, downtown from the site. Those things do go relatively quickly too, but it's just something that we've been doing. There are other mandated requirements, like for example, a transit screen, and we're putting a very prominent one in the lobby and integrating it into part of the public, part of the art that we're doing in the entry area and so on. But no, the e-bikes are just an example of something that we like to think to encourage sort of out of the box thinking and to promote sort of different behavior, if you will.
Mm-hmm. So you're committed to doing that.
That's exactly right. Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay, great. The shuttles being excluded from building operation, I understand. I learned recently about the pros and cons of shuttles, and they're not always as easy or as attractive as I originally thought. But if there were shuttle service, how could employees at this building take advantage of that?
Well, I mentioned it within the context of the residential neighbors and the concern that certain shuttles that are privately operated have been cutting through the residential neighborhoods essentially to get to the Caltrain station.
Yeah.
And we reassured the neighbors, that the residential neighbors, that we weren't providing a private building operated shuttle. If a tenant were to have a shuttle program because they have multiple buildings, for example, within an area, which is not uncommon. We haven't seen a lot of that in San Carlos, but not uncommon when you look at life science clusters. part of what we committed to as well was to spell out in the lease agreements that they would be committing to taking a route that would not involve cutting through the residential neighborhoods, that it would in fact go around so as to not create a pedestrian safety issue
I see.
for the residents.
Okay. Okay. Good. So it would still be an option. It just has to be a workable, a workable setup. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe Commissioner Ruth, if I can add on to that a bit. We are
do.
taking a look at shuttle system and different transportation options through the East Side Vision study. We've got a traffic consultant that's taking a look at what that route might look like and where some stops might be. And given the size of this building, it may not warrant having its own independent shuttle service, but it may be something that in the near future, we have a transportation management authority that all of the property owners and business owners in the area can participate in, and there's a more coordinated shuttle program. So for example, at 887 Industrial the Meridian 25 property, there is a pullout in front of that site that could accommodate a shuttle. And I know at 1091 Industrial, they had a pullout that I think the commission asked to be widened to accommodate additional drop-off cars that probably could also accommodate a shuttle. So we'll be looking at different areas where a shuttle might be able to stop, and it's not going to stop at every business. That just wouldn't be efficient. It may be that you walk a block or so to get to the shuttle.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. I think that's important. I mean, it's challenging with the proposals that come before the Planning Commission, the one-off projects, and then you start to think, well, when you start having a lot of these one-off projects, that they could add up to create a problem, traffic jams or whatnot. But it sounds like there's some provisions with potentially with the shuttle and the other things that we've been talking about to address that. Right. The TDM plan would provide leverage. The review, if it's not working, we have some leverage on the property owner to make it right. So.
Right, and Samtrans also working on their Reimagine and looking at their routes and seeing if this would be a new route as well to provide a service there.
Okay, okay. That's all the questions I have at this time.
Any questions from any other commissioners of the applicant, the architect, or staff before we hear from the public?
Bradley has one more question, and I'll proceed it again with a favorable comment. I was delighted to see a relatively small sign, and I believe it doesn't face 101, which, in my opinion, always creates safety hazards and distraction of high-speed driving on the freeway when there's advertising or directional types of signs, buildings along 101 there. Question is, congratulations on that sign item. Question is, there was comments from a leasee or developer next door or adjacent 767 properties. I believe it's a dance studio for young people, and an idea of increasing the width of the easement for access of both your building and theirs in the future. Is that, and then but they had some good ideas, and I didn't see follow-up on developers and the staff or to the staff to understand what I'm getting at. Can you put a little light on that for me, please?
I'm happy to. Sorry, I wasn't sure if that was directed at me, but we're in contact with the master tenants, or the team that master leases the building, and I believe that Mr. Bear is actually on this call at the moment, but We're in communication, and we haven't seen a specific proposal with respect to a proposed project, but we reiterated our commitment and shared that with staff as well, that we would be open to exploring ways to enhance the public realm and both projects when such proposal is put forth, and separately or speaking with their tenant, the dance studio, whom we understand has 3 or 4 years left on their lease, with respect to the construction specific coordination as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we see who is in the waiting room? All right, let's move now to public comment. Thank you, Mr. Sanandaji. I said it wrong, Sanandaji, for all those answers. And thank you to staff. And we will now move to the public comment period. There are a couple of ways you can comment. You can use the raised hand feature on Zoom, or you can press *9 on your phone. Sarah, is there anyone in the waiting room?
Yes, there is.
All right. Can you say about how many people there are in the waiting room? I'm just trying to get an idea of time.
Yes, we currently have 3.
All right. We'll let the first person in the waiting room welcome, and you will have 3 minutes to make your comment. And please state your name for the record.
Yes, this is Debbie Baldacci, and I speak for myself and my husband, Gary Baldacci. We are San Carlos residents, and we live farther than 300 feet away from this development. And we have one objection and then one question. The objection is to the parking variance. We object to the parking variance requested by the applicant on page 11, which would decrease the number of required parking spaces from 229 to 183. That's a net loss of 46 spaces. And although the applicant claims it will provide 198 spaces, that's still a net loss of 31 spaces. The planning department must make 4 findings before granting the variance. Despite the staff's recommendation to grant the variance, it does not appear to qualify for a variance because of finding C on page 11. The finding reads that it must, quote, not be detrimental or injurious to property or improvements in the vicinity and will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, general welfare, or inconvenience. There will be 600 jobs in this building, and that only provides 1/3 of them with parking. There also will be over 7,500 new jobs in this area, and reducing the parking requirement could lead to increased street parking in neighboring areas, especially the single family home area within 300 feet. Therefore, we respectfully request that you deny the variance, because although the applicant will enact measures to encourage its employees to avoid parking on site, those are voluntary only. And as he mentioned, people are taking public transit less. The second is just a question. We question the finding that there will be no long-term air quality impacts due to operational emissions and odor. We basically request additional information about the number of exhaust stacks, the height of the exhaust stacks, the velocity of the exhaust stacks, and the possible negative impact on air quality closer than 300 feet from the building. On pages 51 through 54, staff writes that there will be no hazardous emissions or odors from operation of the businesses. However, the applicant concedes that some will be biotech or life science. Therefore, the presence of hazardous emissions cannot be known at this time. However, if you look at the plans, they show at least 4 exhaust stacks on the roof And it's our understanding that they've been granted a height extension for the stacks. And
Ms. Balducci, your time is up. If you could please wrap up.
thank you. On page 55, I would just say that staff says that receptors for hazardous emissions are located 300 feet away and are dependent on the wind blowing from north to
Ms.
northwest.
Balducci, if you could please wrap up. Your time is up.
We
Thank you.
request that sensors be closer.
Sarah, next person in the waiting room, please welcome and state your name. And you will have 3 minutes.
John Bear.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great, hello, members of the Planning Commission, staff, and Cyrus, it is nice to meet you via Zoom. I just have quick comments. So I'm with JMS Development Partners. We do have the 99-year land lease on the 767 building. It is our intent and has been for over a decade to redevelop that parcel once the visioning is complete on the east side. So we have a long-term invested interest. In short, we enthusiastically support this adaptive reuse. It's a creative redevelopment and it's a compelling design. However, while we are highly supportive, we do have a concern that is narrowly focused. And first, I think for the record, it's very important to put on the record that the 20-foot easement that runs a horseshoe around our parcel is actually a shared easement. That entire horseshoe is shared between the 2 buildings. So Cyrus, I just want to make sure you're aware of that because we would not be able to permit anything that obstructed that easement without our prior written approval. So I just want to make sure that's clear. The second is that shared 20-foot easement was created in 1950, and it never anticipated the massing or intensity of use from the current 21st century life science proposal. Accordingly, we believe that the proposed circulation plan for 777, which is based on these antiquated 20-foot easements, is not adequate to provide efficient and safe ingress and egress for the trimodal circulation of the 21st century, which includes autos, bikes, and pedestrians. Specifically, I have participated in the East Side visioning plans, and circulation is a very high priority throughout the life science district. Millions of dollars will be invested by both the city and developers to ensure efficient and safe trimodal circulation. My concern is that while the vision and investment will get trimodal circulation to the frontage of 777, the physical constraints of the existing 20-foot easement will make it virtually impossible for automobiles, bikes, and pedestrians in unison to get from Industrial Road to 777 building by way of this narrow entry easement. And for you all, the math is very simple. You need 22 feet for a 2-way drive aisle. You need 6 feet for a bike lane and 8 feet for a sidewalk. This constitutes 36 feet. They've only got 27 feet to work with. This means that somehow bikes, automobiles, and pedestrians are either going to have to share a path of travel, which is not safe. We don't want pedestrian and bikes and cars in the same travel path, or they're going to have to trespass. And trespass would be likely on our land. So this raises a variety of concerns.
Mr. Barry, your time is up. If you could please wrap up.
I will. So therefore, what I'm asking with full cooperation is that the PC ask the developer, Cyrus, to work cooperatively with us as the owners of 767 to look at a ingress and egress trimodal solution that is efficient and safe. And this design would
Mr. Bear, if you could please wrap up. Your time is up.
This design would likely require reconfiguration of the existing easements. We will work cooperatively with the developer.
Thank you, Mr. Bear. All right, the next person in the waiting room, Sarah.
Caller ending in 853.
Good evening. Please state your name and you will have 3 minutes.
This is Rob Boynton, Can you hear me there?
Yes, we can.
I am a property and business owner at 719 Industrial, and I have two questions. One is, in the parking, I tried to understand the very creative triple deck parking, where he said, Cyrus said it would take about a minute to get the car into the parking place. But at the end of the day or in the morning when we have 500 people, and let's say that of the 500 people, 30% of them are driving, the other 60% would be taking transit. How do you get those people in there without backing up traffic onto Industrial Road? That's one of my questions. The other point of interest is I have a 20,000 square foot building at 719 with 20 people. This is going to be 500 people. And I'd like a little bit more development or explanation of how we're going to get 500 people in and out of this facility in a timely fashion that doesn't interrupt the Industrial Road and commercial traffic of many small businesses that have deliveries going on at the same time that people would be entering and exiting a normal work day. So those are my two questions.
Thank you, Mr. Boynton. Sarah, is there anyone else in the waiting room?
No further comments.
All right. Lisa, does staff or the applicant want to respond at all to any of those new issues? The one I was thinking about was I was assuming that some of these hoods in the labs had filters before they were exhausted out the stack. Maybe you or Cyrus can comment on that. I thought that was a good question.
Yeah, if I could just briefly maybe address all of the comments that were provided. And then I would also appreciate our CEQA consultant is on the phone, Rebecca Ald. And so she can address some of the comments as well. And then we'll have the applicant fill in from there. So the first comment was relating to the variance. It is not a parking reduction for the variance. The variance is to exempt or not count some of the floor area that's currently used for covered parking. So I just wanted to clarify that. The variance is not related to the number of parking spaces. I think the next comment was by Mr. Bear relating to the width of the driveway. So that also was taken a look at by our traffic consultant, and they found the width of the access to be adequate given this use on the site. And not only would it serve the vehicles traveling, for the tenants, but also some deliveries as well throughout the day, and that it would be adequate for multimodal access. And Rebecca Ald can expand on that. And then the trip and the traffic and how quickly people can get onto the site and use of the stackers. This use would have less peak hour trips, so that's less in the morning and in the afternoon during heavy commute hours than the existing use does. What it does have though is more overall trips throughout the day. So this type of use generates more traffic throughout the day. It's spread out throughout the day, and it's not concentrated during those peak commute hours. And that's based on the evaluation by the traffic consultant. And then Rebecca, if you have anything else you want to add or reinforce, and then I can have the applicant expand on what happens with the exhaust system. Thank you.
Sure. The driveway is acceptable for multimodal as it is now. The ability to expand the driveway is pretty limited from the perspective of this project. If the adjacent property owner wanted to coordinate with them to expand those easements, that could be a possibility, and things can always get better, but it's considered acceptable, and it was not identified as a potential hazard by our traffic experts when they took a look at it. And as Lisa said, generally speaking, the number of trips are going to go down from what it was under the auto dealership. So again, that's not going to be a problem. From the perspective of additional trips on industrial, it'll actually be less trips on industrial. I think that covers what we're talking about now, but if anything else comes up, feel free to toss it back to me again.
Thank you, Ms. Auld. Mr. Sanandaji, do you want to respond to some of the other more technical comments?
I'm happy to within my layman capacity, if you will. But with respect to compliance for the ventilation, the exhausts, all the uses would have to go through appropriate jurisdictional review and approval, whether it's Bay Area Air Quality Management and so on. And there are very strict codes with respect to scrubbers. Commissioner Garvey, I think you asked whether or not the hoods, for example, would have appropriate ventilation and filtration before any exhausts ever reached outside the building, and that's exactly the case. That's industry standard. So we expect the building to be fully in compliant with all codes and all laws applicable, not just at the local, state, and federal levels.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that response. Very helpful. Let me loop back in with Sarah. Sarah, anyone else in the waiting room?
Not at this time.
Any other responses that the city or the applicant or the CEQA consultant want to make on any issues before I entertain a motion to close the public hearing?
I don't have any further comments.
All right. At this point, I think that I will entertain a motion that we close the public hearing.
So moved.
And I will second that. Lisa, roll call.
Commissioner Clements,
Aye.
Commissioner Bradley,
Aye.
Vice Chair Roof,
Yes.
Chair Garvey.
Yes. All right, we've heard from staff, the applicant, and the public. I'll now open up the meeting for discussion amongst commissioners. And I had, in looking at the packet, I have a suggestion for how we structure our discussion tonight. We have 5 areas to discuss, and I thought we might take them individually in the following order. I'll propose this, and then I'll ask you if you would like something different. We'll start with the CEQA mitigated neck deck, and then we'll move on from that to the variance, which, as you know, involves the floor area ratio. Following that, we'll look at the conditional use permit, which relates to the stairway and the setback and the height. Following that, we'll look at design review relating to the zoning ordinance and the general plan and overall design. And we'll finish up with the transportation demand management plan. I have the variance and the conditional use permit pretty early on in our discussion. If there's any changes in those areas, I think they will inform our design review discussion. So I wanted that to follow the variance and the conditional use permit. So let me just throw it out to my fellow commissioners. How does this order sound, and does this work for everybody?
Yes, agree.
Good for me.
Okay. Okay.
I agree. So we'll sort of confirm agreement on each of these 5 areas before moving on to the next. Is that the...
Yes, thank you. Yes, Vice Chair Roof.
That sounds great.
All right, let us start then with CEQA, the mitigated neg deck, the mitigated negative declaration. Any comments? And keeping in mind the basis, because the Honda dealership is so new, much of this neg deck was used from the Honda dealership with modifications as necessary for this new use. Any comments on CEQA? had one question possibly for the CEQA consultant. I was looking for a traffic analysis in here and I didn't see one. And then I read a little further in the packet and there isn't a traffic analysis because there's more trips, there's less peak trips. Can you clarify why, again, for me, why there isn't a traffic analysis in this document?
Sure. So there is a traffic analysis. It's just not a full LOS analysis. It's included as attachment B to the document. They took a look at the number of trips and compared to the trips that were occurring under the auto dealership and did find generally a reduction in the amount of trips. So San Carlos and in general, jurisdictions require a full LOS analysis when there's a certain amount of traffic. Obviously, you don't need to do it for one car or two cars. Usually that threshold is about 50 peak hour cars. So if you're adding 50 cars during the peak hour, you want to run the full traffic model, run it through the whole rigmarole and see what's going to happen. In this case, they're not generating 50 net new trips. It's generally negative net new trips. So it's not necessary to run that full LOS analysis to be able to conclude that they wouldn't have, I'm going to use the word impact here, but a significant impact on the traffic. In addition, CEQA from a state level has moved away from that LOS format of analyzing traffic that way and instead moved to looking at the vehicle miles traveled. It's a little more comprehensive of we want to get people to drive less and then we'll have less traffic impacts and we don't need to look nitty gritty at every intersection if we look at the big picture of how far is everybody driving and how much driving is occurring. So that VMT analysis is included in this transportation attachment. And due to the area being San Carlos that the project is in, there is generally a higher vehicle miles traveled in this area than in other areas in the region. So it would have a significant impact without any mitigation. And that's where the TDM plan and specifically the mitigation that has been applied to strengthen the TDM requirements has been put in place to make sure that the project would comply with the VMT threshold, so vehicle miles traveled.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I did notice that some of the mitigation measures in the negative declaration are duplicative in the transportation demand management plan.
That's correct. So it's a little bit of a strengthening of the city's TDM requirements.
It is a construction project, and I did look at the construction management practices, and I found them to be very, very standard. I personally did not have any issues with the mitigated neg deck. I thought it read well, and it was a sound document.
Yes, I also thought it looked quite adequate. And it's kind of a testament to it's a smart approach that the developer is taking to repurpose the existing structure, and the scale is largely recapitulated. So the impact is limited, and there's some efficiencies, and that we don't have to repeat everything in terms of understanding the impact. So in terms of the environmental determination, I don't have any concern. I will have some thoughts when we get to the TDM, but that's a little bit later.
Okay. Hearing nothing beyond that, I'll infer that we have general agreement amongst the commission on the CEQA document. I'm going to move on now to the variance. Recall the variance is relating to the floor to area ratio and the preservation of the wells. There are 4 findings here. I'm not going to go through each one individually. I think that's a little bit too cumbersome, so I'll open it up for general discussion on the variance topic.
Chair, if I could ask staff to pull back up the variance slide. I found the slides very helpful, trying to scroll back and forth between a very large packet. The slides help. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I can give my thoughts on this, which is that because of those wells and the desire not to put the parking underground, they're stuck with at-grade parking, and that makes it fall under the parking square footage to fall within the FAR. But it's sort of an exceptional circumstance formed by the need to maintain those wells. And so the fact that the parking is included in the floor area ratio seems like something that is exceptional and is a pretty good reason to provide the variance. I think the point was made pretty well already that the variance isn't impacting the number of cars that would be, number of parking spots that would be required, just that it's whether we make an exception to the floor area ratio rule with regards to parking. So maintaining the foundation and the existing structure is kind of an integral part of this project. And if they're going to do that, then I think we would have to, I think it makes sense, and it's a reasonable justification to provide the variance.
I would agree with that. When I looked at the drawing, I originally thought the wells would be all clustered in one corner. They're not. They're spread out over a fairly large area, and it's really tough to use that whole area. So I would be supportive of the variance.
Yeah, I concur that the wells seem to be distributed such that the parking is designed as best as could be on the site. And so the variance is necessary. And I think the 4 findings were made sufficiently. I have no comments or objections.
I'm hearing general agreement then on the variance. Any other comments before we move on to the conditional use permit? All right, let's move on to the conditional use permit. This relates to the stairway and the height. Given the 16 feet above 50 feet for the elevator, the stairs should be set in, and they're not, they're on the face. So therefore the setbacks are not met. The building itself is set back in compliance, but the stairs are not set back. They are on the facade. Any comments on this?
Well, I could comment. I find the visible stairs to be an important design element in what is otherwise, a fairly boxy building. And so its visibility enhances the pumping out of the stairs. And I find it to be an important design element. I have no problems with this exception, and therefore the need for the CUP.
Commissioner Roof, Vice Chair Roof.
I agree, and it is a pretty big, not the right word, allowing the conditional use permit to have these stairs, really they're protruding instead of being recessed. So it's a pretty big impact on the overall height of the building, I'd have to say. But when you take it in the context of this building next to the other existing and planned development in the area, which are much taller buildings, some of them. It's not like this is on El Camino Real or Laurel Streets where an imposing structure would impact the feel for the neighborhood. In this case, it seems compatible with the neighborhood. So even though it's a big exception, it's to look at, and it does have the positive benefits that have already been stated about breaking up the facade, and it looks pretty nice. So I'm good with the conditional use permit for the protruding stairs.
I agree with both my colleagues.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Bradley, and I'll add my voice to that as well. I think the stairs, when you walk into the building, are going to make for, when you walk towards the building, make for a very dynamic and positive effect. I think it all looks rather grand when you have the stairway there and you're walking in, and that's an important first impression. So architecturally and design-wise, I can see why that decision was made, and I think it's a good one.
I would also add that an additional amount of height in a building that borders Highway 101 is, to me, a 50-foot height limit here is too low. And I would also, for the record, support a 5-story building on El Camino Real any day of the week.
All right. Any other comments on the conditional use permit and the findings? All right, hearing none, I'm hearing agreement amongst all the commissioners for the conditional use permit. Now we will move on to design review. There are 5 findings. These relate to the zoning ordinance and the compatibility with the general plan and the overall design and quality of materials. Any discussion on the design review?
Well, this may be redundant, but I would state again that they made of an unattractive building a very attractive building with the choice of materials, the scale, the massing, saving and using like plenty of solar panels, innovation of using the stacked parking, and something that we haven't mentioned so far much is the attractive roof deck area.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Well put, Commissioner Bradley.
I will tag on to that. Well put. That roof deck is going to have the best view and look so neat. That's just a wonderful design feature. So yes, I will add my voice to that. Looks good.
Yeah, I concur. I want to go up there and have a fundraiser already. So thanks for the offer. I do think also, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, being a retired Air Force Reserve officer, we like to look at planes taking off and landing. We'll be able to do that from this roof deck at our own San Carlos Airport.
I'll also add just that having greenery on part of the roof is a good idea for the environment. The other design elements, not just the appearance of the building. I appreciate, the use of the TDM. I know it's a practical element in order to, reduce the amount of surface parking that one would otherwise need in order to expand the amount of office space. But, I think it's an excellent trade-off for the public benefit. And so I'm happy to see bike parking in there and e-bikes, and I'll look forward to, kind of seeing more and considering how this integrates more with the East Side visioning process and all the kinds of micromobility options that are exciting, I think, for this area of the city.
I would agree with that. I look at that glazed glass and it's just so attractive and so much more attractive than concrete. The quality of the building materials is outstanding, and the design is very handsome. That's a very attractive building. A lot of thought has gone into the design and the materials that comes through, and I really appreciate that.
Any other
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, Chair. I would just say I appreciate also the explanations about the trees and kind of the limiting factors to integrate additional greenery. So again, I even more appreciate the fact that there is some greenery on the roof deck, because as much as we can possibly do in an area that is, next to a concrete highway and surrounded by surface parking, I think it's important. So thank you for trying to maximize that.
And to build on that, there was something that was said in the applicant's presentation regarding lighting and trying to keep sort of annoying lighting in the nighttime down. And I really appreciated that these lights were designed to be downward facing. Many of them are motion activated so that you don't have too much light coming off of the site at hours of the evening and night when you don't want it. And I appreciated that element in the design. Any other comments on design review and the 5 findings? Vice Chair Roof, I see your hand is up. Oh, you're on mute.
Actually, I was intending to lower my hand.
Okay.
I'm good with this. I'm good with this one.
All right.
Looking forward to the TDM discussion though.
All right. Hearing no further comment, I am taking agreement amongst commissioners on the design review questions. That brings us to the final area for discussion, which is the transportation demand management plan and the 2 findings that need to be made. Who would like to open up the discussion? And Vice Chair Roof, is your hand back up now, or would you like to wait?
I can start, and I think the plan seems pretty good, but there's a lot of uncertainty in how things are going to work out in terms of how many people are, and they've done their best estimate at what that will look like. But nevertheless, there is a lot of uncertainty, and also in the context of the overall development in the area, whether there's sort of compounding impacts that could lead to traffic problems. And all 3 of the public comments that we received had some element of concern with the transportation impact. And our leverage as a city, once we say yes now, then they're good to go for 5 years. And there's no, I'm sure there'll be good citizens and willing to talk, but we don't have sort of legal leverage to extract concessions or solutions necessarily until once we sign off on it tonight, maybe. But there is this 5-year review on the TDM where there's a new assessment done after 5 years. But 5 years seems like a long time. So what I'm going to toss out is, and I'm not sure about the practicality, but would it be possible to require an earlier review so that if there are problems, we have a way to address them in a shorter time frame, say 3 years?
Sounds reasonable to me.
This is Greg Rubens. That type of condition is in your discretion to approve the TDM plan.
Yeah, and I through the chair, I was going to suggest 3 years. So I appreciate Vice Chair's comment, because you do need some amount of time for normal operations and people get used to new kind of travel habits. So I appreciate that timeline. And also my thought was that it would be most appropriate to include that in the mitigation monitoring plan, and then have the certificate circle back and then reference the language in the mitigation monitoring plan. So mitigation measure in your CEQA document, mitigation measure trans 1, item number 7 would be modified to reference the 3 years and not the 5 years. And then in your condition of approval, condition number 43 would then reference consistency with that mitigation measure, trans 1.
Oh, I see. And that is the measure in the TDM would link with the mitigation measure in the mitigated neg deck.
That's correct.
I see. That makes sense.
So
And
that would, just to make sure there's, no inconsistency with that changed wording.
I would support that. And I like how we're looking at both the CEQA document and the transportation demand management plan so that they are aligned. And I appreciate the comment from the attorney that this is something in our discretion. Vice Chair Roof, that's a very good suggestion.
Other than that, I thought the TDM and the measures that they are proposing, it looks good. It's just that having a check on it in 3 years would make me feel a lot better.
Commissioner Clements, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to get clarification from staff. Was the 5-year check back part of the TDM kind of standardized program? Or was this just proposed as part of this candidate's proposed TDM plan?
It is our standard requirement in the municipal code, is the 5-year.
And so does some kind of finding need to be made in order to vary from that 5 years?
You do have that since we're relying on compliance with the TDM plan in the, to get compliance with the VMT, but you would like to see that in a 3-year time frame in the CEQA document. And that's why it's more appropriate to place it there. Yes.
I see. So the code can rely on the CEQA document, and the CEQA document does not need a particular finding, but I find that public input being at least somewhat concerned about potential impacts, I think at least warrants us to discuss it or check in at that time. Just to clarify then, I think I read that the 5 years concept was a driveway check, and that, so what is the ramification if the TDM goals are not being met at the time of the check-in? Are there penalties associated, or is it simply a, here's where you are and let's redirect course in order to meet the goals?
Yeah, we would want to see more measures in order to meet the goals. And then I think failure to do so, I'd have to defer to the city attorney. We may be in a code enforcement situation where they're not in compliance with the approved plans, and there's an opportunity to revoke the permits.
Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, it is the responsibility of the building owner to make sure that the transportation demand management is carried out, and that they would contract with whoever is occupying the building in order to make sure that that happens. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Or provide the services themselves?
Either one, yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I agree. If it takes less than 5 years to kind of establish per staff, revised kind of transportation patterns, if you will. And if we think that that tenants will be in the building within a couple of years after the completion of the building, hopefully right away after the completion of the building, I will trust staff's judgment as to what the correct timing or what the best timing is to kind of re-examine whether the TDM measures are being effective based on advice from our consultants and your experience with the TDM program. But I'd also like to hear from the applicant on their thoughts, if that's okay, Chair.
That's okay. And I think I saw a hand up from the applicant. Mr. Sanandaji, would you like to comment?
Yes, sorry, I wasn't quite following the etiquette of raising a hand, so I didn't want to interrupt your conversation. But we plan on actively monitoring this sort of regardless of the requirement contained herein. And I appreciate the commission recognizing that we would want the building to be fully occupied in order to actually have a real measure. And so we're in favor of adjusting the timeline such that it's 3 years after, I believe it's COO, so completion of the project. We just confirm that to make sure that it's not from the date of approval, which would be too short given construction period required. So.
May I ask a follow-up question? Is there ever, per the candidates or the applicants' comment, is there ever an alternative threshold where it is a certain amount of time after full occupancy of the building that the measurement could be done? I just want to be sensitive to the fact that it's possible that a tenant can move in and then actually not have it fully occupied. So I actually wouldn't, for the city's benefit, I wouldn't want the evaluation done too early. I would want to make sure it was completely occupied with as many, employees as was going to be there, as were going to be there.
Do we propose that it would be subject to some percentage of lease up or stabilization, if you will, occupancy of the building? And a set period, call it a 36-month window thereafter.
Yeah, I would ask for staff's thoughts and our council. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think Greg Rubens here. And also I just was looking at the code. It's sort of a organic process to it. There is a 5-year review that the code talks about, but it does say that annually, there is to be information submitted to the director. So the approach will lead to the 3-year review that you put in there, which is, my read of it's not prohibited, but the 5-year review will likely still be required per ordinance, but you'll have the annual reviews and then your mitigation monitoring plan 3-year review, and then you'll have the 5-year review. I think that's how will work in this instance.
And there are no prescribed penalties for not meeting the TDM goals at this time.
I mean, I think Lisa was correct that it could lead to code enforcement, but in my experience, the purpose of the review is to suggest modified or substituted conditions that would allow to meet the goals of the plan. So if there's some changed circumstances or not as anticipated impacts occur, we do have some ability in these reviews to modify the term. And
I would hope that all of us would be on that side, Greg, as you state, with just trying to make sure that the programs, that the mitigations are working as planned, and that we're not really exposing the applicant to kind of additional potential downsides by asking for additional monitoring. And so, as you said, there will be annual reports that will, I assume, kind of indicate for potentially, the level of occupancy. And so it would be knowable if the 3-year review, 3 years from COO, was appropriate at that time, but, all with the objective of trying to achieve the goals of the transportation demand management program.
Yeah, and just to be clear, that it's the annual reviews go to the director, not to the planning commission, but you're asking that the 3-year review come up to you guys.
Oh, I'd ask the vice chair if that was his intent.
Yes, that sounds good. And I'm not too worried about the occupancy thing, because if 3 years isn't quite long enough, then we have the 5-year one still on the books. So assuming that the timer starts at the completion of project, I don't know how long it takes to build the building, but that could be a year or two. So assuming that the timer starts.
Construction is going to be about a year, I think.
Yeah. So if does anybody know whether that 3-year, formerly 5-year period is triggered at the project completion, or what? That would make sense.
Commissioner Root, from our reading, it's from the issuance of the certificate of occupancy.
Okay.
It's based on occupancy, because if there's no one in the building, there's no choice.
Yeah. Then it keeps it simple. If we have 3, I suggest 3-year and 5-year, and we don't even have to the occupancy unnecessary to me, but.
May I just clarify what Lisa just said? Whether or not a building is occupied does not mean that it has gotten or not gotten its certificate of occupancy. That indicates it is ready to be occupied, not necessarily that it is occupied, correct?
Correct, but typically with these buildings, we're seeing that they're not doing the full tenant improvements until they have a tenant secured. And so it's been following that based on the certificate of occupancy that then the tenant moves in. But you are correct.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Thank you. Well, with that, I would say I would support the vice chair's almost motion. If you wanted to make one.
Any other discussion on the transportation demand management plan before we entertain a motion?
May I make one other, I guess, question? Perhaps that would have been better earlier, but comment, which is, sorry, when we talk about alternative forms of transportation, it's important to think about those with limited mobility. And so e-bikes could work, but really only for the physically able, probably who are willing to go fast and don't have any physical maladies that would prevent that from being possible. So I do want to, I guess, ask, are there alternatives in the TDM plan for people who have limited mobility? Just a thought.
Does staff have a comment on that or a response?
Just looking through the TDM plan real quick. Sometimes it's the guaranteed ride home, which is probably the most applicable. There's carpool, vanpool ride matching services. We could add yeah, it is in there. Their commuter service has the guaranteed ride home program. I think that was probably the most applicable.
Just clarifying though, the applicant has selected that as a measure?
I believe so.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Didn't want to interject again. Yes, we have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Any additional discussion on the transportation demand management plan before we look to a motion? All right, Lisa, if you could put the motion up on the screen.
I guess I would be pleased to make the formal motion, and I might need some help with the wording on the condition. I move that the Planning Commission adopt the resolution approving the mitigated negative declaration and mitigation monitoring plan and grant approval for design, review, variance, conditional use permit, and transportation demand management plan for the development of a new 122,455 square feet building at 777 Industrial Road, APN 046-100-360 and 046-100-070. and 046-100-080 for the reasons incorporated in the staff report and with the conditions in the code compliance and variance certificate, and with the condition that we discussed, which is to, in the mitigation monitoring plan, to have the 3-year assessment as well as the original 5-year in both places that Lisa was mentioning needed to be included. So maybe this staff could help with the wording on this additional condition that we're asking for.
Yes, it's to amend mitigation measure trans 1, item 8 to require a 3-year and a 5-year review, and then also amend the condition number 43 in the code compliance certificate to require a 3-year and a 5-year review.
So I would like to incorporate what Lisa just said into the formal motion that I'm making. Does that work?
I think that works.
Yes.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion before I ask Lisa for a roll call? All right, Lisa, roll
Actually,
call.
I wanted to say one thing, which is that we had a pretty big job tonight. There was a lot of questions that we had to assess, and the staff report was very thorough, and it let us get through what was a large volume of material very efficiently. So I wanted to say thanks to the staff for making it easy for us to understand that the findings, that the evidence supported the findings that we were making. And so, so thank you for that. Okay, go ahead.
Well said. I completely agree. Good comment.
I agree.
I agree.
All right, Lisa, a roll call, please.
Commissioner Clements,
Aye.
Commissioner Bradley,
Aye.
Vice Chair Roof,
Aye.
and Chair Garvey.
Aye. I'd like to take a minute and thank everyone from the public who not only listened in tonight, but chose to comment. I'd like to thank staff for, and echoing Vice Chair Roof's comment, it just did an outstanding job on a big project. And I'd like to congratulate the applicants on their project and wish them good luck. Mr. Sanandaji and his team, you did an outstanding job. This was a lot of work and you did it. And best of luck to you. This project, I think, will be a very attractive addition to our community. So we appreciate your project. Thank you and best of luck.
Thank you so very much for all of your consideration and time, and to staff especially for just being such great partners. We look forward to delivering a successful project together and coming before you with hopefully many more projects that are beneficial to the community too.
All right, thank you very much. Moving on now to the next item, reports, correspondence, and general information. Report on recent City Council actions.
Yes, good evening, Commissioners, Chair Garvey. I have just a couple of things I wanted to relay to the Commission concerning recent City Council actions. And the first one being is that the Council recently passed an urgency ordinance concerning the protected tree ordinance, which is located in the city's zoning ordinance. And in this case, the urgency ordinance will be effective 45 days, and there is an option to extend it. And it's my understanding that it is likely to be extended so that staff can work on making some revisions to that, to the protected tree requirements and provisions contained in our code. The second thing that I wanted to mention concerns the downtown. And as many of you might recall, the closure of Laurel Street was set to expire this September, and the council decided to extend that for 1 year. So it will be extended beginning in September of 2021 for 1 full year. So that'll take us to the middle of September 2022. And those are all the recent City Council actions that I wanted to share with the Commission this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to Planning Commission comments or reports. Any comments from fellow commissioners?
Bradley here. The Residential Design Review Committee is going to have a special meeting. I believe it's June 29th, 1:30 in the afternoon, because we have 4 or 5 cases built up now.
All right, thank you for letting us know that, Commissioner Bradley. Vice Chair Roof, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I had the pleasure of attending the Eastside Vision workshop that was held on June 9th that the city planning department sponsored. And it was very educational for me. It was enjoyable to participate in. And I heard a lot of feedback from community members, different perspectives that'll be really valuable to help me ask good questions when stuff gets to the Planning Commission.
All right, thank you. Any other commission comments or reports? All right, moving on to correspondence. Lisa?
None this evening.
All right, moving on to planning staff comments, reports, and updates of current projects.
Yes, I have a couple of things to share this evening. One is at our next Planning Commission meeting date, which again will be on July 6th. Due to the holiday, so it'll be on a Tuesday. We do have now calendared the election of officers. So I think it's looking like it'll be a pretty light meeting, but it'll be important that we get this this administrative task done so that we can get the new officers seated, in which case they would take their seats at the next Planning Commission hearing scheduled for July 19th. So that's just a reminder. And I think we'll now have a quorum so that all commissioners can attend and be part of that discussion. On the meeting of July 19th, one item that staff is going to be bringing back to you based upon the commission's previous request is a presentation on some of the bills, the planning related bills that were introduced this year. And I know that there was definitely some interest in the commission. So we suggested that why don't we wait a little bit to see how those bills are sort of shaping up. So we will be having a presentation on that by Aaron Ackman. He is a principal at Good City Company, and he will be making that presentation on the 19th. The other item that we have on the agenda is 1030 Britton. So I think those will be the primary items or the only items it's looking like for the 19th, but both of those will be will be sufficient to have a good meeting. And then sort of moving forward, the next meeting after that would be on August 2nd. And on the agenda for that evening, we have calendared the Climate Mitigation and Adaptation Plan. And this is something that as soon as the draft comes out, I will inform the commission so you kind of can get a head start looking at that. And we'll be working with staff from other city departments and divisions to make that presentation. This would be a recommendation that they would be looking for to the City Council, which is the final decision-making body on that document. In addition to the Climate Mitigation and Adaptation Plan, we may be bringing forward the Local Hazard Mitigation Plan, which is more of a collaboration with the county. It's sort of an implementing document out of the safety element, and it's related both to safety and climate mitigation and adaptation. So that's on August the 2nd. And then following that meeting on August 16th, we will be having a summer recess. So you can mark your calendars for August 16th that there will be no Planning Commission meeting that evening. And then following that meeting, we would return return back on September the 7th, which is Tuesday. But having said that, I did want to touch upon the schedule of the Eastside Innovation District Vision Plan. As most of you recall, this plan will be taken forward in the month of September to formal hearings with the Planning Commission and City Council. So that is what we expect to happen in September, where we would be taking the vision plan before the Commission to get your recommendation to the City Council, and then completing the project as planned on time by the end of September. So basically what this means is that because all of this is to happen in September, where everything is falling is that we're looking to study sessions during the month of August. And I know I just said that we are giving the Planning Commission a summer recess on the 16th. However, I wanted to give you all the heads up that most likely we're going to need to poll the commission for a study session in late August. We're currently working with our consultant team right now, Perkins and Will, on the calendar to really bring this project forward to the finish line. But I wanted to bring it to your attention this evening so that if anyone has any conflict whatsoever, I'd rather hear from you early on so we can make the necessary accommodations. Again, this would be for the study session, but not the formal hearing that we would have in the month of September. So just a little bit on that. And then as Commissioner Roof or Vice Chair Roof just mentioned, we did have a meeting on the Eastside Innovation District Vision Plan recently on June 9th. We do have some materials up on the website. So if you haven't had a chance to look and are curious, it's just a reminder that that information, the video recordings, the chat transcript, and all of the input is intended to keep you informed along the way as if you attended the meeting. It's always nice to be able to watch the playback. That is all I have this evening, and I will follow up with an email. I know I provided a lot of detail on what's coming up ahead, so I'll just go ahead and send out an email just to get it all out in writing. So thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you, Lisa. A lot is happening, and a lot is happening, especially in August and September. All right.
Thank you, Chair. May I just clarify with Lisa, when you say a study session in late August, do you know which weeks you're looking at?
Let me just pull up my calendar here.
And if not, that's fine.
Yeah, I think what we would hope to do is probably actually the very last week of August, which would be the 30th, the 31st, which is basically the Monday, Tuesday. I don't know exactly which days, but if there's anything that's sort of kind of on your calendar right now and it's going to be problematic, please let me know. We want to do our best to accommodate all of you. So, while nothing is, we haven't even penciled it in, we just have a targeted time frame. So, so we will let you know as hopefully by the end of this week. We're having a meeting this week to talk about it. So,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I might have a conflict then with the vacation, but if calling in was an option, I might be able to make that happen. So
yeah, I think we're still looking at a Zoom meeting for that.
Yeah, then I might be able to make it work.
Great. Okay.
But we'll communicate by email.
Great. Sounds good.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. And with that, I believe we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks to both Lisas.
Exactly.